All right, so we're diving into something I know a lot of you have been thinking about. Bug out bags. We've got a whole pile of survival guides here, articles, we even went to Wikipedia, all to help you guys build the best bag for your needs.
It is pretty smart to start with, like a clear picture of what we're actually talking about. The term bug out bag, like it gets used a lot, but
Mhm.
it's a lot more than just chucking a bunch of stuff in a backpack. It's got to be a portable lifeline, right? It's designed to get you to safety, keep you alive when you absolutely have to evacuate.
Now, I keep hearing people talk about a good bag, get out of Dodge bag, or is it the classic, like, 72-hour kit? Is it really that complicated?
It can seem that way, but the main idea is actually pretty simple. It's a survival kit for when you have to leave home, and the type of bag you need really depends on what you're preparing for. Like a short-term power outage versus, like the whole world going sideways, you need a different approach.
So we're talking different types of bags, not just one size fits all.
Exactly. It's like think of it like this. You wouldn't use the same little backpack for a day hike as you would for a week-long trek out in the wilderness. Same thing here. You got 1-day bags, 3-day bags, even 7-day bags for those heading off grid. And then we get into the heavier stuff, the 30-day, even 100-day bags. That's for the folks really prepping for long term.
100 days? Whoa, that's not just bugging out, that's starting over.
Right. That's a whole different ballgame. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, okay? We're going to break down all these different bag types, starting with the most basic, the 1-day or the 24-hour bag.
So is this like my everyday carry but on steroids?
Huh. Yeah, kind of. It's more like your get-home bag, right? Imagine you got to evacuate suddenly, you need to get back to your family, but the roads are blocked or, I don't know, the power's out across the whole city. This bag's all about bridging that gap, getting you back home safe within a day.
So we're talking immediate needs.
Yep, exactly. Water, some snacks, a basic first aid kit, maybe some essential tools, a flashlight, things like that to keep you, comfortable and safe for a short period.
Now, the 3-day bag, this is what most people think of when they hear bug out bag, right?
Yeah, I think so. It's the Goldilocks bag for a lot of folks. FEMA and other organizations recommend that 72-hour kit cause in a real widespread disaster, it could take that long for help to get to you.
So you're giving yourself that buffer, time to get to safety, or maybe for things to calm down a bit.
Exactly. So you're basically expanding on those 1-day essentials, right? You add more food and water, a bigger first aid kit, something to start a fire with, and like a basic shelter, maybe an emergency blanket, just enough to be self-sufficient for a few days.
Okay. Now, things get really interesting with the 7-day bag. What kind of situations are we thinking about here?
All right, so this is where we step beyond just like those short-term disruptions. Think like a week-long power outage or a natural disaster that forces you to evacuate to a temporary shelter, or even if you're just planning, a serious off-grid adventure.
So not just emergencies, but also people who want to be more self-reliant in general.
Yeah, absolutely. The 7-day bag kind of builds on that 3-day foundation, but now you're thinking larger quantities, more durable gear, more food, water, a way to cook it, a sturdier shelter. Maybe you're bringing a tarp or a small tent. You might need some tools to gather water or purify it out in the wild.
All right, now we're getting into some serious prepper territory, the 30-day bag.
Yeah, this is where we're really talking about, shifting from surviving to actually sustaining yourself. Think long-term disruptions, potentially a grid down situation. So you need enough supplies to last you a whole month and tools to help you replenish those supplies like fishing gear or a better water purifier. This is about being able to adapt, maybe relocate if you need to.
And then there's the behemoth, the 100-day bag. This isn't just bugging out, it's starting a new life.
Exactly. Like, this is the ultimate what if scenario, people prepping for a total societal collapse. The 100-day bag, it's all about rebuilding, creating a whole self-sustaining lifestyle, relying on the outside world as little as possible. I mean, it's a huge undertaking, not something most people need to worry about.
Okay, that's a lot to wrap my head around. But let's bring it back down to earth a bit. No matter which bag type you choose, there are certain essentials that apply across the board, right?
You got it. These are the non-negotiables, the foundation of any bug-out bag, even if the quantity or the specific type changes depending on the situation. And it all starts with the most important thing, water.
Well, we all know you can't live long without it. What's the strategy here? Just load up on bottled water.
I mean, bottled water is great for that initial grab and go, but for the long haul, it's way too bulky and heavy. The real key is having a way to purify water from any source you find. And that's where it gets kind of interesting. Because you might think, oh, that stream or that lake looks clean. But in a disaster, the water can get contaminated in ways you wouldn't even think of.
What kind of contamination are we talking about here?
Think about like floodwaters, right? They pick up everything: sewage, chemicals, industrial runoff. Even a stream that looks pristine can become a breeding ground for bacteria and viruses after a disaster. So, you need to have a multi-pronged approach: immediate water supply plus a reliable way to filter it.
So you're not just filtering out dirt, but potentially dangerous stuff too.
Exactly. This is where things like a life straw or a Sawyer mini filter come in. Those things remove bacteria, protozoa, even microplastics. They can turn potentially deadly water into something you can actually drink.
Wow, a tiny item with a huge impact.
Yeah.
Because the water's covered. What about food? Are we talking about stockpiling years' worth of canned goods?
Nah, not quite. Remember, a bug-out bag is all about mobility. We need food that's non-perishable, calorie-dense, easy to pack, energy bars, trail mix, those MREs meals ready to eat. They're great for the short term. They pack a lot of calories into a small space. And while they may not be gourmet...
Certainly. When you're hungry, you're hungry.
Exactly. For longer-term situations, those freeze-dried meals are a good option. They last for years if you store them properly. Pretty easy to prepare, just add hot water. And honestly, they've come a long way in terms of taste.
All right, let's talk fire. Seems pretty basic, but it's more than just keeping warm, right?
Fire is like your multi-eye tool when it comes to survival. It's for cooking, boiling water to make it safe. You can signal for help. It gives you light at night. And honestly, it's a big psychological boost, that sense of control, a little bit of normalcy in the middle of chaos.
So how do we make sure we can start a fire reliably, especially if we're not, expert fire starters?
The key is redundancy. You want at least 3 ways to get a fire going. Matches in a waterproof container, a lighter, and a fire steel. Matches can get wet, lighters can fail, but a fire steel, that thing's almost indestructible. It can throw sparks even when it's damp.
I've seen those things. They're like magic.
They are pretty cool, but knowing how to use them is just as important as having them. Practice building fires in different weather, using different tinder. You don't want your first try to be in a downpour with your hands shaking.
Yeah, that's good advice. All right, water, food, fire, now shelter. How much do we need to actually carry?
Well, this one really depends on what you're preparing for and what kind of bag you're building. For a short-term evacuation, a simple emergency blanket or one of those bivy sacks can be enough to protect you from the elements. Keep it lightweight, compact.
But for longer, we'd need something a bit more substantial.
Right. For a 3-day bag, a lightweight tarp's a good choice. Versatile, you can set it up in different ways, and it gives you decent protection from rain and wind. Longer term, you might be thinking about a small, lightweight tent. And if you're really serious about wilderness survival, maybe even a hammock shelter.
I've never actually slept in a hammock, but I hear they're pretty comfy.
They can be. And you're off the ground, which is great if it's wet or cold. Comfort is key, though. Doesn't matter what kind of shelter you choose, a good night's sleep is vital. You got to keep your energy up and stay sharp, especially in a stressful situation.
So along with the shelter, we've got to think about how we're sleeping.
Exactly. You need a sleeping bag rated for the temperatures you expect. If you're worried about space, an emergency thermal blanket or a sleeping bag liner can give you extra warmth without taking up a lot of room. And one thing people often forget, dry socks are crucial. Wet feet. That's blisters, infections, even hypothermia.
Okay, we've got those big things. Water, food, fire, shelter. But there's more to it than just that, right? What are those little things that people forget but can really make a difference in a survival situation?
Yeah, that's when we get into the specifics. This is where your personal needs and what you think might happen really come into play. Let's start with something that seems basic but is super versatile: a good knife.
A knife seems obvious, but I'm guessing it's not just grabbing the first one I find in the kitchen drawer.
Nope, not at all. You need a reliable, sturdy knife. It can make a huge difference. We're not really talking about self-defense, though that might be something to consider depending on your situation.
So what kind of knife are we looking for in a big out bag?
Ideally, a fixed blade knife with what's called a full tang construction. That means the blade steel runs the whole length of the handle, makes it much stronger, way less likely to break when you're putting pressure on it.
So a full tang is tougher. What if I have a folding knife?
Folding knives are great for, everyday carry, but for a bug-out bag, a fixed blade is usually more reliable, simpler, sturdier, less likely to fail you when you really need it. And remember, you're going to be using this for a lot of different things: cutting rope, prepping food, repairs, maybe even building a shelter.
So that cheap survival knife from the gas station, probably not a good idea.
Probably not the best choice. Quality really matters. You need a knife that holds an edge, can handle heavy use. It won't let you down when it matters most.
Okay, good knives are key. Now, what about first aid? Do we just grab one of those pre-made kits and call it a day?
Those pre-made kits are definitely a great place to start, but it's really important to, customize it based on, what you might need. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, pain relievers, tweezers, those are the basics. But for longer term, or if you're going somewhere remote, you need to add to that.
Like what kind of stuff are we having?
Think about adding a tourniquet for serious bleeding, maybe a SAM splint to stabilize fractures, even a basic suture kit for closing wounds.
Sutures. Whoa, that's getting pretty intense.
It can be. But knowing how to close a wound properly can stop an infection, even save a life if you're in a remote area or when things are really bad. And the knowledge is just as important as the stuff itself. Taking a wilderness first aid course, that can give you the skills to handle all kinds of medical emergencies.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just having the stuff, it's knowing how to use it properly.
Exactly. Now, here's something that might not seem essential at first, but it's surprisingly useful. Paracord.
Paracord. Isn't that just for camping?
It's for way more than that. In a survival situation, paracord is it's like duct tape for the outdoors. It's super strong, lightweight, and you can use it for a ton of different things.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Building shelters, securing gear, fishing line, repairing equipment, even making traps for small game. Honestly, paracord's only limited by your imagination. Most survival guides suggest having at least 50 to 100 feet.
That's a lot of cord. Never would thought to use it for all that.
It's one of those things that can really, elevate your preparedness without weighing you down.
Okay, paracord's going on the list.
Right.
What about another unsung hero of the survival world? Duct tape.
Ah, duct tape. It's the ultimate fix-it tool. It's amazing how many uses you can find for a roll of duct tape when you're in a survival situation. Repairs, building shelter, treating blisters, making tools, even splints. It's amazing how versatile it is.
If you can't fix it with duct tape, you're not using enough duct tape.
Exactly. And here's another one that might surprise you. Trash bags. Super cheap, easy to find, incredibly versatile.
Trash bags. Now I'm intrigued. How would you use those for survival?
They're not just for garbage. You can use them as waterproof liners for your backpack, makeshift shelters, ponchos if it's raining, even for collecting water or signaling for help.
Wait, signaling for help with a trash bag?
Yeah, a brightly colored trash bag spread out on the ground that can be seen from the air, especially if you're in a remote spot.
Okay, now I'm seeing the potential here. Everyday stuff taking on whole new meaning.
It's all about thinking outside the box, being resourceful. And those skills, they're just as important as anything you put in your bag.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground here, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface of what makes a truly good bug-out bag. What other essentials should we be thinking about?
That's where we get into the stuff that often makes the difference between just surviving and, actually doing well in a tough situation. And it all starts with something most folks don't think about right away: cash. It's funny, we kind of take for granted that banks and ATMs are always going to be there, that our money's safe. But in a real disaster, when everything's shut down, cash is king.
Yeah, that's not something that would have jumped out at me right away. Why small bills, though?
Small bills are way more useful, especially right after a disaster when people might be bartering, trading goods and services. You try to buy a loaf of bread with a $100 bill when nobody's got change.
Good luck with that. Okay, so cash for those first few transactions. What about clothes? Do I need to pack my whole closet?
Huh. Not quite. But picking the right clothes is more important than you think. It's not just about being comfortable, it's about staying safe and protected from the elements.
All right, so what are we looking for when we're picking out clothes for a bug-out bag?
Think layers. You want moisture-wicking base layers, something to keep you dry. Then, insulating mid-layers for warmth, and a waterproof outer shell to keep the rain and wind out. And those dry socks, remember? Super important for preventing blisters and infections. Little things like that can really affect how comfortable you are, especially if you're on the move.
Yeah, it's easy to forget about the small stuff until it becomes a big problem.
Absolutely. And while we're on the topic of essentials, let's not forget about navigation. GPS might not work in a disaster, or your phone battery could die. That's why you absolutely need a physical map and a compass. Those are non-negotiables.
Okay, back to basics. But honestly, I'm pretty useless with the compass. Are those skills really that crucial?
More than you realize, probably. Imagine trying to find your way out of a city after an earthquake, or trying to get to a meeting point when everything looks different. Being able to use a map and compass, that could literally be the difference between life and death.
That's a good point. It's so easy to rely on our phones, but when they don't work, we need to know how to do things the old-fashioned way.
Right, and it's not just about finding your way, it's also about feeling like you have some control, some sense of direction when everything else is crazy.
Makes sense. Okay, so navigation is on the list. Now, what about communication? We've talked about how cell service and the internet might go down. How do we stay connected with family or get information about what's happening?
Redundancy is super important for communication too. A whistle is a simple but really effective way to signal for help, especially if you're hurt or lost. To get news and alerts, a hand-cranked weather radio is a good bet. No batteries needed. And don't forget about those old-school emergency contact
Oh, yeah,
cards.
the kind we used to keep in our wallets.
Oh, exactly. Write down all those important phone numbers and addresses on a waterproof card and keep it in your bug-out bag. You just never know when you might need those low-tech ways of getting in touch.
Good idea. All right, we've got clothes, navigation, communication. What about personal documents? Should I be packing my whole filing cabinet?
Probably not. But having copies of important documents in a waterproof pouch, that can be a lifesaver. Imagine you're displaced from your home. You need to prove who you are, access medical records, insurance information.
It would definitely speed things up if you need help or services.
Absolutely. It takes a lot of stress off you so you can focus on more urgent things. Now, besides these absolute must-haves, there are some nice-to-have items that can really make your life easier in a tough situation.
Okay, let's talk about those extras. What kind of things are we talking about here?
One thing people often forget is a sewing kit. Seems simple, but a small tear in your clothes or gear, especially in cold or wet weather, can turn into a big problem fast.
Being able to fix those things on the go, that could make a big difference.
For sure. And it's not just about fixing tears. You might need to adjust your gear, make modifications on the fly. Another item I always recommend is a signal mirror.
I haven't used one of those since I was a kid. Are they actually useful in a survival situation?
They can be lifesavers. If you're in a remote area or injured and can't move far, a signal mirror can be seen from miles away. Could alert rescuers to your location. And they're tiny, easy to pack. It's about maximizing your chances of being found if you need help.
That's a good point. All right, here's one that I know can be a bit controversial. Firearms.
This is definitely a personal choice, and we're not saying everyone should or shouldn't own a gun, but it's important to acknowledge that for some folks, a firearm is part of their preparedness plan, especially if they're in a remote or potentially dangerous area.
So if someone does choose to have a firearm in their bug-out bag, what are the most important things to keep in mind?
Safety and responsibility, always. You absolutely need to be trained in how to handle and use any firearm safely, store it properly, and understand the laws about carrying and using a firearm where you live.
And it's good to remember that a firearm is just one part of self-defense.
Right. Being aware of your surroundings, knowing how to de-escalate a situation, and even just being able to run away, those are often the most effective ways to protect yourself. It's about having a multi-layered approach to safety, both physically and mentally.
That's a lot to think about. So many things to consider when putting together a bug-out bag. It can feel overwhelming. Where do you even begin?
It can be a lot, for sure. But the trick is to break it down into smaller steps. Start with the basics: water, food, shelter, fire, first aid. Get those foundational elements in place, and then you can start to customize your bag based on what you might need, what kind of situations you're prepping for, and, your budget.
So it's not about buying everything all at once. It's about building your kit over time.
Exactly. And remember, it's an ongoing process. Your bug out bag should change as you learn more and as your life changes.
Makes sense. It's not about being perfect. It's about constant improvement.
Now let's talk about something that can be a bit scary: societal collapse.
Okay, now we're getting into some apocalyptic stuff. But it's something that a lot of preppers think about, especially when they're building those long-term bags, like the 30-day and 100-day kits.
It's true. The chances of, society completely falling apart are up for debate, but it is something some people choose to prepare for. But it's important to think about this rationally and avoid getting caught up in all the fear-mongering.
So if someone is thinking about prepping for a societal collapse, what does that actually look like? It's not just about hoarding supplies, right?
It's way more than that. It's about developing a resilient mindset, a willingness to adapt when things change, and a commitment to community and cooperation.
I can see that. In a real collapse situation, we'd have to rely on each other, not just our own stuff.
Exactly. Skills like gardening, food preservation, basic mechanics, first aid, conflict resolution, those become super valuable when the systems we rely on break down.
So it's about shifting from a mindset of scarcity to one of abundance, knowing that we're stronger together.
Absolutely. And that leads us to another sensitive topic that comes up a lot in discussions about preparedness, the possibility of conflict during a disaster.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Nobody wants to think about having to defend themselves or their loved ones.
But it's a reality we can't ignore. Disasters can bring out the best in people, but they can also bring out the worst. When people are scared and desperate and resources are scarce, things can get dangerous.
So how do we prepare for that possibility without, becoming paranoid or letting fear take over?
It's about finding that balance in how you approach personal safety. Being aware of your surroundings, avoiding risky situations, knowing how to de-escalate a conflict whenever possible, and having a plan for self-defense as a last resort.
And as we talked about before, that self-defense plan might involve a firearm for some people, but
It's crucial to remember that a gun is just one tool, and it's not always the right tool for every situation. There are a lot of other ways to protect yourself and your family. It's about having a well-rounded approach, being prepared physically, mentally, and emotionally.
that makes sense. Being prepared for all sorts of possibilities, not just fixating on the worst case.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about some of the mistakes people make when they're putting together a bug-out bag. It's always helpful to learn from others, right?
Absolutely. What are some of those common pitfalls we should try to avoid?
One of the biggest mistakes is overpacking. People try to cram every single thing they think they might need into their bag, and then they end up with this monster they can barely carry.
It's like when you overpack for vacation, you end up hauling around a bunch of stuff you never even touch.
Exactly. A bug-out bag isn't supposed to be your whole house on your back. It's meant to be a lifeline to get you to safety. So prioritize the really essential items and be honest with yourself about how much you can actually carry.
Finding that balance between being prepared and being able to move. What other mistakes do people make?
Another common one is forgetting to actually test their gear, practice using it. It's not enough to just have the stuff, you need to know how it works.
Yeah, that's like having all the ingredients for a gourmet meal, but not knowing how to cook.
Huh, exactly. Set up your tent in the backyard, try out your water filter, go through your first aid kit. Don't wait till you're in a real emergency to figure out how things work.
And here's one I'm definitely guilty of. Forgetting about those little comfort items.
Yeah, being in a bug-out situation is stressful enough without being uncomfortable or bored out of your mind. Pack a few small things that make you happy, help you deal with the tough stuff.
So we're not just talking about bare bones survival. It's also about staying sane and feeling as normal as possible in a crazy situation. What kind of comfort items should we be thinking about?
It really depends on you, what you enjoy. A book, a deck of cards, a journal and pen, even a favorite snack. Anything that can boost your morale and help you deal with the challenges you're facing.
It's about taking care of your mental and emotional health, as well as your physical needs.
Exactly. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about bugging out with a group versus going solo. There are pros and cons to both approaches.
Yeah, I can see that. What are some of the things we should think about when making that decision?
Well, a group can offer safety in numbers, you can share resources, and you have a wider range of skills and knowledge between you. But it also means coordinating plans, making compromises, and you might have to deal with personality clashes, disagreements.
So more people can mean more support, but also more potential for conflict, especially when everyone's stressed out.
That's right. Going solo, you've got more flexibility, independence, and maybe less risk of arguing with your group. But it also means you're totally relying on your own skills and resources, which can be scary.
So which way is better?
There's no right or wrong answer. It all depends on your personality, your group dynamics if you have one, and the specific situation you're in. It's about being honest with yourself about your strengths, weaknesses, and what you're comfortable with.
And even if you plan to bug out with others, being able to take care of yourself is still super important.
Absolutely. Now, have you ever heard of bugging in?
Bugging in, what's that?
Bugging in, or sheltering in place, that's often the safest option in a disaster, especially if your home is well prepared. Think, reinforced windows, a well-stocked pantry, a backup generator, and a plan for communication and security.
So hunkering down and riding out the storm.
More than that, it's about making your home a safe haven, a place where you can weather the crisis and come out stronger on the other side.
Bugging in versus bugging out, two very different approaches to being prepared. How do you know which one is right for you?
It depends on what's happening, what kind of disaster you're facing, and your own assessment of the risks and benefits of each option. Bugging out is a last resort when staying home is just too dangerous. But if your home is secure and you have what you need, bugging in might be the safer and more sustainable option.
So, having a plan for both scenarios, being ready to adapt as things unfold.
Exactly. Now let's get real for a minute and talk about building a bug out bag on a budget.
Yeah, let's be honest. Preparedness can get expensive, but it doesn't have to break the bank, right?
Absolutely not. Building a bug out bag on a budget is all about being creative, resourceful, and prioritizing what you really need. Start by looking at what you already have. You might be surprised how much you already own that can be useful.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Old clothes, blankets, tools, even those reusable shopping bags we all have lying around, those can be repurposed for a bug out bag. And don't underestimate the power of thrift stores, garage sales, online marketplaces. You can find great deals on gently used gear.
So it's about being thrifty, using what you've got, not just running out and buying the most expensive gear.
Exactly. And you don't need to buy everything all at once. Start with the basics and then add more as you can afford it. Focus on the essentials first, and then you can get the nice-to-have stuff later.
And don't forget about DIY.
Right. You can make your own fire starters, put together your own first aid kit, even make a water filter with a little ingenuity and some online tutorials.
It's about learning how to create solutions with what you have, not just relying on buying everything.
Exactly. Now let's talk about something that's often overlooked when we talk about preparedness: mental and emotional resilience.
This is where things get really interesting. Gear and skills are important, but they're useless if you're not mentally and emotionally prepared to handle the stress of a disaster.
So true. Having a positive attitude, knowing how to cope with stress, and practicing mindfulness, those things can make a huge difference in how well you navigate a crisis.
It's about being as prepared mentally and emotionally as you are physically.
Absolutely. And it's a process, just like putting together your physical bug out bag. It's about building resilience on the inside as well as the outside.
Okay, I like that. But where do we even start with building that inner resilience? It seems kind of abstract.
One simple but powerful practice is gratitude. Taking a few minutes each day to appreciate the good things in your life, even the small things, can shift your perspective and create a foundation of positivity.
So focusing on what you do have, not what you're missing.
Exactly. It's also about challenging those negative thoughts and replacing them with more positive ones. We all have that inner critic, but learning to recognize and reframe those negative thought patterns can make a huge difference in how we react to stress.
Like training your mind to be more flexible and adaptable, like a mental martial art.
I love that analogy. And speaking of training, don't underestimate the power of physical activity. Exercise, even just a walk in nature, can lower stress, improve your mood, and boost your overall well-being.
So it's not just about being physically fit, it's about being mentally and emotionally fit as well.
Exactly. And let's not forget the importance of connection. Talking to loved ones, spending time with friends, being part of a supportive community, those are all essential for building resilience and fostering a sense of belonging.
It's a reminder that we're not meant to go through difficult times alone. We need each other.
And if you're struggling, don't be afraid to seek professional help. Therapists, counselors, support groups, they can provide valuable guidance and coping mechanisms for dealing with stress, anxiety, and trauma.
Asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about some practical steps you can take to prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for a potential disaster.
I'm ready for some actionable strategies.
One key step is to visualize different scenarios. Imagine yourself facing different challenges. From a power outage to a natural disaster, think about how you would react, what you would do, and what resources you would need.
Like a mental rehearsal, working through potential problems and solutions before you're actually in a crisis.
Exactly. It's also helpful to have a communication plan with your loved ones. Know how you'll get in touch, where you'll meet up, and what you'll do to make sure everyone is safe.
Having a plan can definitely reduce anxiety and give you a sense of control when things feel chaotic.
And let's not forget self-care. Make time for activities that bring you joy, relaxation, and peace.
Whether it's reading, listening to music, spending time outdoors, or meditating, those moments of self-care can really help you recharge and cope with stress.
It's about taking care of yourself, recognizing that you can't give to others if you're running on empty.
Okay, that's great advice.
Yeah.
So we've talked about building inner resilience, visualizing scenarios, having a communication plan, and prioritizing self-care. What else can we do to prepare ourselves mentally and emotionally?
One of the best things you can do is cultivate a sense of curiosity and a willingness to learn. The more you know about potential risks, the more confident and empowered you'll feel in facing them.
So it's not about being afraid, it's about being informed.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, and it can help to replace fear with a sense of control. Read books, watch documentaries, take courses, talk to experts. The more you learn, the more prepared you'll be, both mentally and emotionally.
That makes sense. It's about shifting from a mindset of helplessness to a mindset of empowerment. What are some specific topics we should be learning about?
Start with the basics. First aid, fire starting, shelter building, water purification, navigation. Then you can branch out into more specialized areas like gardening, preserving food, basic mechanics, wilderness survival, and even self-defense.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff to learn. It can feel a little overwhelming.
It's true, there's a lot to know. But remember, it's a journey, not a destination. Start small, focus on one skill at a time, and celebrate your progress.
So it's not about becoming a survival expert overnight. It's about gradually expanding your knowledge and skills over time.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask for guidance from experienced mentors or instructors. There are a ton of people out there who are passionate about preparedness and willing to share what they know.
That's encouraging. I'm starting to see how preparedness can be more than just a practical thing. It can be a path to personal growth and feeling more in control of your life.
It definitely can be. And that brings us to another crucial part of mental and emotional preparedness, building a support network.
That's a great point. We've talked about how important connection is, but how do we actually build a support network specifically for preparedness?
Start by talking to your family and friends about your interest in preparedness. You might be surprised how many people are open to the idea or even already prepping themselves.
So just starting the conversation, not being afraid to share your interests and concerns.
Exactly. And if you're looking for people who share your interests, there are tons of online forums, groups, and even in-person meetups where you can connect with other preppers.
It's not about going it alone. It's about finding a community of people who can share knowledge, resources, and support.
That's right. And that community can be so valuable, not just for the practical information, but also for emotional support and encouragement.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. Preparedness is more than just stuff and skills. It's about building a resilient mindset, connecting with others, and being part of a community.
Exactly. It's about building a life that's ready for potential challenges, but also full of meaning, purpose, and connection.
That's awesome. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about surviving in the wilderness.
All right, time for some adventure. But it's super important to be realistic about this. Wilderness survival isn't about eating bugs and drinking your own pee. It's about having a solid foundation of skills and understanding the risks involved.
So it's not about becoming Bear Grylls overnight. It's about having the knowledge and skills to stay safe and comfortable outdoors. What are some of those key skills we should be focusing on?
The essentials are finding and purifying water, building a shelter, starting a fire, finding food, navigating with a map and compass, and signaling for help.
And those are skills you can use anywhere, right? Not just in the wilderness, but anytime you might be without those modern conveniences.
Absolutely. It's about being self-reliant and adaptable, no matter what you're facing.
Okay, I see that. So wilderness survival skills are not just for hardcore adventurers. They're useful for anyone who wants to be more prepared and resilient.
Exactly. Now, let's not forget about our furry friends bugging out with pets.
Right, we can't leave them behind.
Yeah.
What are some things to think about when it comes to bugging out with pets?
First, make sure your pet's vaccinations are up to date, they're microchipped, and wearing collars with ID tags.
So if they get separated, there's a better chance of finding them.
Right. And pack a separate bug out bag just for your pet with food, water, bowls, a leash, any meds they need, and maybe a favorite toy or blanket.
A mini bug out bag for your furry friend. What other tips do you have for bugging out with pets?
Think about their specific needs. A cat might need a carrier, a big dog might need a harness to make it easier to handle them. And remember, pets can get stressed and scared in a disaster, just like people.
So be patient, try to keep them calm, and give them as much comfort and routine as you can.
Exactly. Now let's talk about something that a lot of people debate. The ideal bug out location. It's not just about getting away, it's about getting somewhere safe and sustainable.
Right. So where is the best place to bug out to?
There's no one perfect answer. The best spot depends on your personal situation, the type of disaster, and what you're looking for.
Okay, that makes sense. What are some of the things we should be considering when we're choosing a bug out location?
Think about access to water, food sources, shelter options, and potential threats. Do you want to be somewhere remote or closer to civilization? Do you have family or friends who live outside the danger zone?
And that bug out location might not be your final destination. It could be a temporary safe spot while you figure out what to do next.
Right, it's about having options and being able to adapt.
So no magic formula for choosing the perfect spot. It's about careful planning and considering different factors.
Now, let's talk about communication in a disaster, something people often overlook.
Yeah, that's a cool one. Cell towers can go down. The internet might be out. How do we stay informed and connected when those systems fail?
Having backups is key. A hand-cranked weather radio is a must-have to stay updated on the situation. Walkie-talkies can be good for short-range communication with your group.
And don't forget those old-fashioned methods, like signal mirrors, whistles, even writing messages on flags or bright cloth.
It's all about using what you have and being creative, whatever it takes to get your message across.
So communication isn't just about technology, it's about having backup plans and knowing how to improvise.
Exactly. We've talked a lot about gear, skills, and planning, but we can't forget about the most important part of preparedness, mindset.
This is where things get really interesting. It's not just about the practical side of things, it's about being mentally and emotionally prepared.
That's the foundation everything else is built on. Having a resilient mindset, being willing to learn and adapt, and keeping a positive attitude, those things can make a huge difference when things get tough.
It's about facing challenges with courage and determination, knowing that you have the strength and resourcefulness to get through anything.
And don't underestimate the power of hope. Believing that things will eventually get better can get you through even the darkest times.
That's a really powerful message. So it's not just about prepping for the worst, it's about believing in our ability to overcome challenges and make things better.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about learning those crucial survival skills. It can seem intimidating, especially if you're just starting out.
It can be, for sure. Where do you even begin?
Start with the basics. Fire starting, shelter building, water purification, and navigation. Those are the foundational skills that can make all the difference in your ability to survive. And not just survive, but thrive in a difficult situation.
And there are plenty of resources available to help us learn those skills.
Right, absolutely. You've got books, websites, online courses, and even in-person workshops where you can learn from experienced instructors.
So it's not about figuring it all out on your own. It's about finding good teachers and learning from others.
Right. And don't be afraid to practice those skills regularly, making the challenges a little harder each time. The more you practice, the more confident and skilled you'll become.
So put that knowledge into action. Don't just read about it.
Now, let's talk about something that sometimes has a negative connotation. The prepper community.
Yeah, preppers don't always get the best reputation. They're sometimes seen as paranoid, hoarding supplies, or obsessed with doomsday scenarios. But is that really accurate?
Not at all. The prepper community is actually very diverse. It includes all sorts of people with different reasons for prepping, different beliefs, and different ways of doing things.
So it's not just one type of person who's drawn to preparedness.
Nope, not at all. You've got people from all walks of life with different backgrounds, jobs, and perspectives. What they have in common is a belief that it's important to be prepared for potential challenges, whether that's natural disasters, economic turmoil, or even just everyday emergencies.
So it's about taking responsibility for your well-being and the well-being of your loved ones, no matter who you are or what you believe.
Exactly. And it's about connecting with other people who get it, who can share knowledge, resources, and support.
I can see how being part of that community could be a big help, not just for learning practical stuff, but also for the emotional support.
Absolutely. And it's a community that's always learning and changing as new information and challenges come up.
So it's not about being stuck in the past or clinging to old ideas. It's about being open to new information and constantly improving.
Now, let's talk about something a little more hush-hush. Building a hidden bug-out cache.
Okay, this is where things get a little sneaky. What exactly is a bug-out cache?
It's like a hidden stash of essential supplies that you can access in an emergency, especially if you can't get to your main bug-out bag.
That's like a secret treasure chest of survival gear.
Exactly. Think food, water, tools, medical supplies, even extra clothes.
So it's like a backup plan for your backup plan, making sure you have resources even if you can't get to your main supplies.
Exactly. But building a bug-out cache takes careful planning, and you gotta be discreet. You need a spot that's safe, that you can get to, and that other people won't find.
So finding that balance between keeping it secure and being able to access it, what are some tips for finding a good location for a bug-out cache?
Look for places that are out of the way, not easily seen from roads or trails. Natural features like rock formations, hollow logs, or thick bushes can be good hiding spots. And make sure you can get to it, but other people can't.
So it's a balancing act between security and accessibility.
Right. And you also need to protect those supplies from weather, animals, and even theft. Waterproof containers, airtight bags, and camouflaging your cache can help make sure your stuff is safe and ready when you need it.
Okay, that's a lot to think about. Building a bug-out cache sounds like a serious project, but it could be really valuable in a true emergency.
Definitely something to consider as you become more experienced in preparedness.
Now let's talk about the role of technology in a bug-out bag, which is something people often have different opinions about.
Technology can be really useful in a disaster. It gives you information, communication, even helps you navigate, but it's super important to remember that technology can fail. Batteries die, cell towers go down, GPS signals get lost.
So don't rely on technology alone, have backup plans, and those old-fashioned tools that can work even when the power's out.
Exactly. A physical map and compass, a hand-cranked weather radio, even a basic notepad and pen. Those can be lifesavers.
It's about finding that middle ground between using technology when you can, but still being able to take care of yourself without it.
Now, let's talk about something that's not always easy to think about. Dealing with the aftermath of a disaster.
Yeah, this is where things get real. Recovering from a disaster can be a long and difficult process, both physically and emotionally. What are some things we can do to prepare ourselves for that?
The most important thing is to have a plan for what you'll do after a disaster. Know where to go for help, how to reach your insurance company, and what steps to take to secure your property and start rebuilding.
So it's not just about surviving the initial event. It's about knowing how to get back on your feet.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone. Reach out to family, friends, and your community for support. Sharing what you've been through, helping others, and rebuilding together. Those things can create resilience and hope in the face of adversity.
We're stronger together, that's for sure.
Now, let's talk about something that often gets overlooked. Maintaining a sense of normalcy after a disaster.
Okay, now we're getting a little philosophical. It's easy to get caught up in the practical stuff.
But what about taking care of our mental and emotional needs, too?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to focus on just surviving, but what about feeling like human?
Exactly. Maintaining a sense of normalcy, having some routine, even finding little bits of joy, those things are really important for our mental and emotional well-being. If you can, keep doing some of those familiar activities.
Yeah, I can see that. It's about holding on to those things that make us feel grounded, remind us of who we are, even when everything else is crazy.
Right. It's about taking care of ourselves on the inside, not just the outside.
You know, we've talked about this throughout our deep dive, but it's worth saying again. Preparedness isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving.
It's about living a life with purpose, connection, and resilience, no matter what life throws at us.
So as we wrap up our exploration of bug-out bags and all things preparedness, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the most important thing to remember is preparedness is not about being afraid. It's about empowerment. It's about taking control of your own well-being and the well-being of the people you care about.
It's about being proactive, resourceful, and resilient when faced with uncertainty.
And realizing that we're all connected, what we do as individuals can have a big impact on our communities and the world around us.
So what can we do as individuals to encourage a culture of preparedness and resilience?
Start by sharing what you know with others. Teach your family and friends the basics of preparedness. Get involved in your community.
Maybe volunteer with organizations that promote disaster readiness.
Exactly. And advocate for policies that support disaster preparedness.
Okay, I like that. So it's about taking action, not just talking about it.
Right. And most importantly, live a life that reflects the values of preparedness, self-reliance, responsibility, compassion, and a belief in our ability to overcome any obstacle.
Wow, that's inspiring. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question.
Okay, I like that. We've talked a lot about the practical, physical side of preparedness, but
What about the deeper meaning, the spiritual or philosophical side of preparedness? How can we prepare not just for disasters, but for the challenges of life in general? What does it mean to live a truly prepared life?
that's a question for each of us to think about. Let us know your thoughts on our socials. We'd love to hear from you.